How's everybody doing? Whoa, we got that turned up today. I can hear myself reverberating, and that's scary. How's everybody doing? Good? You smiling back there? Smiling over here? Wave at one another. Welcome to the August 23rd meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm still Barry Barker, president of our club and executive director of TARC. To lead us in our invocation is...
Good afternoon. First, it's interesting to be up here as a lowly 03 lieutenant in the Navy to introduce a two-star admiral. So for me, it's somewhat of a treat because it doesn't happen every day. The second is that while Louisville has a proximity to Fort Knox, and then further down the road we have Fort Campbell, this city is a Navy town. We've had some of the best and brightest from the days of the Louisville ROTC program to now. We've seen men like Mr. David Jones, Admiral Gene Price, among others, do great things in this community, all while they wore the whites or the uniform of a United States Navy sailor. However, today is about another patriot. Today's speaker, Rear Admiral Michael Jabaley, is a proud native of Jacksonville, Mississippi. He graduated from honors from Vanderbilt University and was commissioned via the Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. The Admiral holds a master's degrees in administration from Virginia Tech, an MBA from the Naval Postgraduate School, and a graduate of the Command and Staff at the Navy War College and the Joint and Command Staff Officer School of the Armed Forces Staff College. The Admiral's sea tours include 4 submarines, but most importantly, USS Louisville from 2002 to 2004. On shore, the Admiral has been the staff commander of Submarine Group 8 in Naples, Italy. He's also worked with the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Systems on the staff of the Joint Chiefs, and has been operations officer in the nuclear operations, a senior inspector at the Tactical Readiness Evaluation Team, among others. More importantly, he was also the U.S. Deputy Commander for the U.S. Submarine Squadron No. 1 in Pearl Harbor. So we can see the Admiral has a vast amount of experience, not only from command at sea, but also from key staff billets. The Admiral was selected for his first star in 2011. His flag assignments include the Navy Systems Command, Vice Commander. He was also in command of the Navy Sea Warfare Center, and the NAVSEA Deputy Commander of the Undersea Warfare. Selected for his second star in March of 2015, he became the Executive Director of Submarines in 2015, with the also including the Ohio Replacement Submarine Systems and the Virginia Submarine Systems. He has been awarded the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, but more importantly, his proudest achievement among many other decorations and awards as a leader in the armed services is the Navy Battleship E ribbon that the USS Louisville was awarded, which creates a great deal of proficiency, and it's one of the hardest awards to ever receive in the Navy. So this lieutenant sees his notes and knows what he needs to do. Welcome, Admiral. Welcome to Louisville. Welcome back to Louisville.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucas. And thank you all for inviting me here today to speak to you. It really is a thrill. It's very exciting to be back in Louisville. I'm a firm believer that the USS Louisville has got to be the best command tour of any ship in the United States Navy, because the red carpet that the city of Louisville rolls out when we come to visit is fantastic. I had command of the ship from 2002 to 2004. Tremendously fond memories of our visits during that time. I was able to bring 6 of my sailors with me in 2003. Now, wait a minute. I want to make sure I get this right. 2004. It was the year Smarty Jones won the Derby, and we were there. They allowed us to carry the bed of roses out to the infield prior to the race to award to the winning horse. So that was fantastic memory. It's great to be back. This is somewhat of a swan song for me. I turned over my job as Program Executive Officer for Submarines last Friday, to my relief, and my last day on active duty is the 30th of September. But I said, one of the last things I want to do before I retire is do the Navy Week in Louisville, Kentucky. So here I am. This is Navy Week. Hopefully you have seen some of the stuff in the media and around. Vice Admiral Rocky Bono has been here doing a lot of community engagement. I'm here through Saturday. And what we're really trying to do is, although, as Lucas said, this is a Navy town, there's still a lot of people in Louisville who don't necessarily understand exactly what the Navy does for our country, why it is important that we have a strong Navy, and what you can do to help support the Navy. So that is the goal of the Navy Weeks, is to explain to you what the Navy the nation needs is all about. And that is a kind of a tagline. There's two taglines that we're promoting. The Navy the nation needs is what describes the number of ships we need, the number of people we need, the type of training we need, the type of missions that we do, and then the other one is forged by the sea. And that is the brand that we're promoting, and it speaks to the challenges that you go through in order to become a sailor in the Navy today. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And what I want you to come away with this is a better understanding of what our enduring mission is as the United States Navy. And it really is an enduring mission. It has endured for over 226 years, next slide please, since the beginning of our Navy in 1794. So obviously we had a continental Navy during the War of Independence in 1776 and thereafter. And there were some naval engagements as part of that War of Independence. But after we had successfully defeated the British and became a nation of our own, the powers that be decided, well, why do we need a Navy? We've beaten the British. A Navy's expensive. We don't need all of these ships. And so they decommissioned or sold them off, and we didn't have a Navy. And then world events, as they normally do, quickly proved those wise heads wrong as pirates off the coast of Algeria started attacking U.S. merchants, and we quickly said, all right, we do need a Navy. So in 1794, Congress authorized the construction of 6 frigates, one of which you see here, the USS Constitution, which is still in commission as a United States Navy warship up in Charleston Harbor in Boston, Massachusetts. And it's had some work done over the years. But it is the original ship. There are original pieces of the original ship still within there. They do have a regular maintenance program to replace wood over the decades. But it's a classic ship, and if you ever get to Boston, I strongly recommend it as one of the stops on your itinerary. And not only did we name a ship the USS Constitution, but the roots of the Navy are in the words of the Constitution itself. They say, Congress shall raise an army, but provide and maintain a Navy. So we have maintained a Navy since 1794. Next slide, please. So what are the missions of the United States Navy? We talk about it in three terms, or 3 phrases. The first is protect and preserve. We protect America from attack, and we preserve American influence around the world. Prevent and deter. We prevent conflict and deter aggression, enabling the peaceful resolution of crises. And finally, we are always ready to fight and defeat any enemy at any time. So that is a somewhat bellicose casting of what the Navy does, and that is necessary. We have ships on guard duty at all times with ballistic missile defense systems that are mobile because they're on a ship, and they can sit off the coasts of countries that may have ballistic missiles that may want to threaten the United States and be in a position to shoot them down should they launch them. So that is protecting America from attack. We have an engagement policy around the world that's an exercise in diplomacy, and it forges relationships between our country and other countries, but we are always ready to fight should that eventuality occur. Well, what about the non-bellicose part? And this is great synergy. We were fortunate enough to go to the Country Ham Breakfast this morning at the State Fair, and the Kentucky Farm Bureau put on a fantastic event. In case you were wondering, championship ham, $2.8 million. So there was a spirited auction between two parties, and when the bidding got to 1.4, they said, well, how about if we just both donate the money? And I figured they would split the ham, but one of them said, okay, but I get the ham. I'm sure the other guys got plenty of ham anyway. So at that breakfast this morning, Brian Quarles, State Commissioner of Agriculture, gave a really good talk about the importance of farming, the importance of agriculture. Next slide. Here's the one thing that I came up to him afterwards and I said, number one, can I have your speech notes? Because I want to use some of the statistics that you put in. And number two, I kept waiting for you to say, and because of the Navy protecting the global sea lines of communication, we are able to export so much of what we produce in Kentucky. So here are some statistics. On the slide, these are mine, about a quarter. A quarter of all jobs in our country are tied to international trade, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture, international relations. About a quarter of all jobs are directly tied to international trade. About a quarter of manufacturing jobs depend solely on exports. 26% of everything we manufacture in this country gets shipped overseas as part of exporting. And then 22% of all agriculture produced in the United States, 22% by volume, is exported, and almost all of that is, again, overseas. Canada is a very big trading partner. They get a lot of it, but most of it goes on ships to other countries around the world. So why is that important? Well, think back to 1794 and the Algerian corsairs in the Mediterranean Sea, or the Barbary Coast pirates, or now off of Yemen, Somalia. We have tamped down the piracy in that part of the world, but it is always just one change in the environment away from resurrecting again. And the United States Navy is key to keeping those sea lines of communication open. Not necessarily, you won't see an aircraft carrier shadowing every single merchant ship that we send out there. That's not what we do. But we do maintain a presence where we can respond to events if they occur and maintain the free flow of global trade. One other thing that's not on this slide, but 95% of all telecommunications, including internet traffic, goes through undersea cables. When you talk about global communications, the banking system, the financial system, just straight communications, almost all that, and you may think, you know, when I make a phone call from New York City to Los Angeles, it probably bounces off a satellite and back down there. And this is the really surprising part. Your phone call is probably going in an undersea cable across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Indian Ocean, and across the Pacific to San Francisco, because that is faster and cheaper than running fiber optic cable across the United States. Strange but true. Next slide, please. So it's not just commerce and business that we enable. It's really, and not just in America, it really enables the free flow and the market economy around the world. You may know that more than 70% of the world's surface is covered by water. About 80% of the world's population lives within 200 miles of a coastline. And then, of course, 90% of all global commerce is conducted by sea traffic. That includes barges on rivers, but also all of the merchant ships that go around the world. And it is only getting larger and larger as time goes on and the world becomes more interconnected, and we are able to ship goods in places that we never have before. So again, the security of that flow of commerce is vital to the global economy, not just for us, but for all the nations around the world. And despite a century's worth of change, one thing has not changed, In an increasingly globalized world, America's success is ever more reliant on our Navy. Next slide, please. So the Navy the nation needs is ready to defend America, our allies and our partners, and our strategic interests at all times. We're uniquely positioned to do so because the world's oceans provide us with access around the clock to protect America's interests anywhere in the world using naval power from the sea. The foundation of our Navy is, of course, our ships. Instead of those original 6 frigates, the Navy now possesses a wide variety of surface vessels from 97,000-ton aircraft carriers to fast, agile littoral combat ships and coastal patrol vessels. The presence of these vessels anywhere in the world can help deter potential conflicts and avoid escalating tensions. But when combat power is required, ships like the workhorse of our fleet, like this one, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, possess a staggering range of offensive capabilities, giving our military leadership the warfighting ability to fight and defend other navies, fight and defeat other navies, and destroy targets located hundreds of miles inland. So now I know what you're saying, but Admiral, what about the submarines? Tell us about the submarines, because that's what I would be saying if I were sitting there. Next slide, please. Undersea warfare has long been a specialty of the United States Navy, and it's a domain where we pioneered operations and we enjoy an unquestioned advantage around the world. Our submarine force has evolved from diesel-electric boats of old to today's nuclear-powered vessels, armed with everything from torpedoes to tomahawks to ballistic missiles. Yet the most valuable asset of a submarine, like this one shown here, which is the USS Illinois, a Virginia-class submarine, is stealth, the ability to strike from the deep without warning. Our submarines are deployed around the world in places that no one knows where they are, not even their operational commanders, doing things that no one knows what they're doing. They're collecting intelligence, they're preparing the battle space, they're learning the environment, they're understanding what ship traffic patterns exist there, so that if we need to go to war, we have already been there and we know what we can and should not do should we go to war there. Next slide, please. It's long been held that the first question an American leader asks during a time of crisis is, where's the nearest carrier? Such a question confirms the importance of naval aviation to America's Navy. And the most prominent component of naval aviation today is the F-18 Hornet, a multi-mission jet capable of carrying out ground attack missions and air-to-air combat, as well as mid-air refueling and even electronic warfare. The Hornet is just one example of the planes, helicopters, and yes, even unmanned aircraft that form the backbone of projected American power, all of which allow us to do a great number of things at sea without the need of another country's permission to operate within its borders. One of the great aircraft carrier advertisements for the Navy showed a picture of one of our nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and listed it as 97,000 tons of sovereign American territory. And that is so critical because we can put that ship up to the international limit, 12 miles off of a coastline, and project power anywhere in that region without anyone's permission except our own. Next slide, please. Today, there are 280 ships in the Navy's battle force, 95 of which are based overseas, which we call the Forward Deployed Naval Force, in locations such as the Middle East, Europe, and Japan. Of the Navy's 400,000 active and reserve sailors, more than 70,000 are forward deployed to support our operations around the globe. Is just one example of the kind of power the Navy can show. This photo features a total of 11 ships and an unknown quantity of submarines, a typical carrier strike group, an amphibious ready group, and approximately 10,000 sailors. Next slide. America's Navy reaches into every corner of the world. We'll go one more. There we go. We have 6 major commands responsible for naval operations, ranging from our own shores to Europe and the Middle East, from Central and South America to Africa, and from one side of the Pacific Ocean to the other. As you can see, these commands carry out a wide variety of missions every day. And here are a few examples of what your Navy is doing right now. Next slide, please. The Navy provides regular support to 2 operations against the Islamic State in the U.S. 5th Fleet and 6th Fleet areas of responsibility, projecting our power against ISIS. Next slide, please. Current operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria include airstrikes from ships in the Middle East and the Mediterranean Sea. Maritime security operations are also a major part of our operations around the world, including counter-terror operations in the Middle East and Africa, and counter-illicit trafficking operations in Central and South America. Next slide, please. The Navy's ability to carry out rapid response humanitarian assistance operations was demonstrated last year in the summer of 2017 after a series of hurricanes struck the Gulf Coast in the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Sailors and Marines from helicopter squadrons on both coasts, as well as the amphibious assault ships USS Wasp, USS Kearsarge, USS Oak Hill, and USS New York, responded immediately to help local authorities carry out search and rescue missions and deliver humanitarian relief supplies. Next slide. Now, at the same time, America's Navy is faced with more than its share of challenges. Some are material, some are financial. Needless to say, all of these challenges pose significant issues for our sailors and their leaders going forward. Next slide. It's often said that we live in an increasingly complex world, and nowhere is this more clear than on the world's oceans. The demand for American naval forces is rising in areas such as the South China Sea, where territorial claims are under dispute, and the Black Sea, where we continue to support our NATO partners. America's Navy is also engaged in operations in the Middle East and Mediterranean Sea, where we use our combat power against targets in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Libya. Another concern is the emergence of competitors and adversaries with increasingly sophisticated forces such as China and Russia, as well as countries like Iran and North Korea who want to deter naval powers from operating near their territory. The advancement of these potential adversaries and competitors makes it more important for our Navy to advance its own forces as well. To do so, we need to modernize our existing ships, aircraft, and weapons to make them more capable. Next slide, please. America's Navy has the flexibility to take on a wide variety of missions. Our military leaders have recognized this flexibility and often call upon the Navy to take on an increasing range of operations around the world. Unfortunately, this higher operational demand has placed a significant strain on our fleet. Not only are we seeing accelerated wear and tear on our ships, submarines, and aircraft, but it has also imposed stress on sailors and their families who have to cope with longer and more frequent deployments. As a result, the Navy has had to forego necessary investments in our hardware and our sailors so that we can keep doing our job in an increasingly complex and fast-paced security environment. Next slide, please. So what we're doing. America's Navy faces its share of challenges, but here's what we're doing to meet those challenges every day, now and into the future. Next slide. Restoring and maintaining the Navy's operational and combat readiness is an immediate concern. Not only must we make immediate investments in the readiness of our afloat forces, but we must also accelerate and extend active ship and aircraft production lines such as the Littoral Combat Ship, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and the F-18 Super Hornet, all of which provide relevant capabilities now and in the years ahead. Next slide, please. The Navy the nation needs is investing in the next generation of naval and aviation technology, including the aircraft shown here, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. During the past year, we carried out testing of the F-35 aboard our aircraft carriers and amphibious assault vessels, preparing them for their ultimate deployment throughout the fleet. Next slide. Of course, America's Navy is nothing without its most important component, the American sailor. The men and women of your Navy serve in a wide variety of jobs throughout the fleet, manning and maintaining our ships, submarines, and aircraft around the clock. Recruiting, training, and properly equipping our sailors is an important step in keeping America's Navy at the forefront of the world's sea services. Next slide. What about the future? Now, you're looking at this going, oh, that's a pretty cool, computer-generated image or painting. This is an actual photo. This is the USS Zumwalt on sea trials doing high-speed maneuvering. You can see the S wake behind the ship. Over the past year, there's been a lot of discussion about what the Navy the nation needs will look like in the decades to come. Two central themes have emerged. First, our Navy will need at least 350 ships to maintain our superiority on the seas, with a focus on both manned and unmanned platforms. Second, we can't just assume that more means better. As we bring new ships into the fleet, we need to change the way we operate that fleet as well. Fact is, these goals aren't for the distant future. The current security environment guarantees that the world won't stop for us to improve our Navy. So we're working right now on bringing new ships into the fleet, ships like the Zumwalt-class destroyer shown here and the America-class amphibious assault vessel. And we're looking to innovate as we go, with an emphasis on expanded power capability, improved networking, and rapid modernization of weapons and sensors. We can't afford to be complacent or rest on our laurels. We must build a larger, more distributed, and more capable fleet. And by increasing our investments in current and future readiness, by accelerating our production of ships, submarines, and aircraft, we can and will ensure a safe Navy for our sailors, a reassuring Navy for our partners, and a lethal Navy for our enemies. Next slide. Hopefully this presentation has given you an idea of what your Navy does on a daily basis and what it has been doing for more than 2 centuries. Through generations of sailors and ever-changing technology, the U.S. Navy is all about defending our country's interests and protecting America. It always has been, and it always will be. That's the mission of today's Navy, and our mission continues. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
Admiral John Walczak with the Louisville Zoo. Thank you, first of all, for your service and your leadership for our
Thank
nation.
you.
I think we're all thrilled to have you in that role and doing all those things for us. My question is, just today in the news, Maersk Cargo Lines was talking about the melting Arctic sea ice and how they're going to start looking at going through the Arctic to expedite shipments. There's so many other things we read about the impact of climate change and our military operations. Can you elaborate that upon challenges facing the Navy and climate change?
Sure. So I would say that there are 2 factors that are of immediate concern due to climate change. The first is, as you mentioned, the shipping industry is looking to capitalize on climate change to allow use of the Arctic routes for shipping traffic. There's another factor at play too, and that's that if the amount of ice coverage is less over the future years than it has been, then it becomes more profitable to extract natural resources from beneath the sea in the Arctic. So that creates a territorial claim question, and which then generates the need for naval presence to ensure that our interests are represented. The Arctic is an area that we have operated in using submarines for over 60 years. We have never not had an Arctic presence, and we will continue to have an Arctic presence to ensure that our territorial claims are respected as well as those of other countries. The best outcome is obviously some sort of diplomatic agreement on sharing the resources and protecting the commerce that will go through there. But the military's part is to ensure that that goal of diplomacy is backed up by a hand of strength. The second area that climate change is causing a concern is the viability of our bases. One of the best things about being in the Navy is that most of our bases are near the water. And we have some really great and beautiful bases. But one of the bad things is all of our bases are near the water. So if we have a rise in the ocean's levels, and not just a rise in the ocean's levels, but the frequency of violent storms and the extent of the storm surge, we're already seeing accelerated flooding in the Norfolk Naval Base, and the flooding events seem to be more frequent. So the Navy is moving out on trying to figure out what to do in terms of recapitalization of our facilities in a manner that accounts for the fact that the future years are going to be more challenging from an aspect of weather events and flooding events. You know, we look at it with a very clear-eyed view and say we have to be able to continue to operate our Navy regardless of what the global environment is. And so what do we have to do to make sure that we can do that? Next question, please.
Yes, hi, I'm Kevin Wardell. Thank you for being here as well. I wonder if you'd spend a minute talking about future workforce. As I look at, you know, the modernization of the fleet, you wonder if it's a little like the business world where we need fewer, more highly trained people to run them, and what can we do both in the service and before, perhaps, in preparing future people to take on careers in the Navy?
Okay, so there's many aspects to answering that question, and it's a great question, and we have a lot of senior people thinking about it all the time and making changes. So first, from a recruiting standpoint, first I will say this: you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, today's kids, they're so much worse than we were, and they just sit around on their phones all day, and they don't have any ideals of service. We have great kids out there, and we see it all the time in the recruiting. The one thing I am concerned about is that there are more and more kids who are challenged to meet the military's physical fitness requirements. Not that they can't get there, but the day they walk in the door, they're not within standards, and it requires a commitment on their part to get there. So that is one thing that is absolutely key, that, you know, that school physical education programs, school sports programs, encouraging kids to be active, that will have a huge effect on us being able to have the pool we need to recruit from. The second is the area of talent management. The unemployment is as low as it's been in decades, and that creates a strong pull for talented, hardworking people to get out of the military and go pursue a future elsewhere. So we are making changes in the way that we manage the officer corps and the enlisted ranks to ensure that we are competitive with what's on the outside. We know we cannot compete in terms of pay, but luckily most of the people that join the military don't do it to get rich. I can tell you that from experience. But the changes that we're making in the way that we promote officers and in the way we bring in officers, we now have the authority to direct commission highly valued experts in things like cybersecurity at the rank all the way up to captain in the Navy or a colonel in the Army or Air Force, which is unheard of, you know, a direct commission at that level. We also have the opportunity to keep people on active duty, not force them, but allow them to remain on active duty beyond what used to be the statutory requirement by age or by length of service. And it's a recognition that if you have a good performer who has a unique skill set that you want to bring into the military or you want to keep in the military, you need to be able to do unique things to support that. So in general, we're very satisfied with the amount of interest in the military and the quality of the recruits. With that one noted physical fitness concern, we are finding it more challenging to keep the highly talented people that we need, especially in an era of low unemployment. Next question, please.
Hi, I'm John Huber. As submarines become more and more stealthy, it puts the surface ships at much greater risk. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So there's two things at play here. A submarine's ability to operate unknown puts a surface ship at risk, but also the advancement and innovation in search radars, satellite imagery also puts surface ships at risk because you used to be able to hide in the middle of the ocean. You know, if you go read history, and so much of it hinges, especially in World War II, on a scout plane just happening to spot the aircraft carrier, and the luck of that allowing a successful attack to take place. That's really hard to do. Not only is there so much more traffic on the surface of the world's oceans, but the visibility in terms of radar, satellite imagery, and then the explosion of internet data on ship locating information makes it really hard for a surface ship to hide in plain sight, which is what they used to be able to do. The result of that has been that there are contested areas where we no longer can operate with impudence. So you can't take a carrier strike group off the coast of country X and just have them sit there as a show of strength, because just off the coast of country X, they are inside the defense systems of that country, and those defense systems are growing in range all the time. So what all of this leads up to is a greater reliance on the submarine force, especially in the opening days of a conflict. The importance of a submarine to be there undetected with a large strike component, Tomahawk missiles, other missiles, et cetera, and be able to launch the opening salvo that will take down air defense systems, that will take down search radars, and that will then allow that surface force to come in and project power, is key to all of our war plans. It's key to our success. We say that the submarine force is the key that unlocks the door for joint military operations, not only the surface Navy, but the Air Force, the Army, and the Marine Corps as well. Next question.
Admiral, thank you for being here today. I had 100, I'm Dick Bryan, by the way, and I had 100 questions, so I'm trying to pick one. It has to do with nuclear power. Can you tell us the advantages of the nuclear power, like, for example, between refuelings and,
Sure.
and especially in the submarine?
So there's a couple of advantages of nuclear power. First, for a submarine, nuclear power allows a significant increase in endurance, range, and stealth time, the amount of time you can remain undetected. Again, you go back to World War II, when a submarine was detected and now was being attacked, there were two problems. Well, many more than two, but a couple of big problems. Number one, how long was the battery going to last, right? Because there was no way to recharge that battery while you were down. You know that if you surfaced, you were going to either be taken prisoner or continue to attack until you sank. The second problem, how long is the atmosphere going to last? Because back in those days, there was no way to have enough power to provide enough machinery to clean the atmosphere and provide oxygen. Nuclear power resolves all of that. The only thing that limits a nuclear submarine's endurance is the amount of food carried on board. And we can be pretty darn creative in ways we can store food. In the old days, we would line the decks with food and then put plywood on top of them. You had to walk hunched over all the time, but you would have enough food for 120 days of operations without resupply. Got pretty dicey towards the end. There was a lot of 3-bean salad and peanut butter sandwiches, but you can make it. The second thing, but that's the only thing that limits it, because we make all of our own oxygen. We clean all of the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide out of the air. We process and dispose of our waste. The nuclear reactor is the continuous gas station that you carry around with you at sea. The submarines we build now don't have to have a refueling of the reactor for 33 years. So it's an incredible technological feat, and it's an incredible advance in military power, because you can literally send a submarine out for 3 months at least and have them operate independently, fulfilling the commander's intent and doing whatever they need to do. It truly has revolutionized warfare. On the surface side, same thing. For an aircraft carrier, the ability to go 34 knots and launch and recover aircraft in any conditions, not dependent on having to point into the wind. So you can go, if you're going somewhere fast, you don't have to turn around to go into the wind to recover aircraft. That's a huge advantage. And then just not being tethered to that fleet oiler that's coming alongside every 3 days to refuel, put more marine fuel on board for your diesel engines. It's tremendous. So it is expensive, but it's darn well worth it. Next question.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Martin. I'm a 1969 graduate of Newport OCS. Appreciate your coming, and the services that you've given is impressive. I guess my question, how do I mean, we read more and more about the Chinese advancing their Navy and taking over islands in the South China Sea. How does the U.S. Navy rank now relative to the Chinese and the Russian Navy, who are spending a lot of time and getting a lot of publicity over there?
Great question. I do want to correct one thing you said. China has not taken over a single island in the South China Sea. They have built islands. And there's a big difference. Number one, it's an environmental nightmare. They're out there dredging up coral and sand and creating islands. Number two, it's completely antithetical to everything in the laws of the sea and the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea. Territorial claims do not exist for fabricated land. However, they're there and they do it, and now they're militarizing them, and so we have to decide how to react to it. So the good news is, for right now, China's Navy is subpar. Their submarines are noisier, they are less effective, their aircraft carrier, which they're building, they don't really know how to do flight ops. Their surface Navy is, you know, it's junior varsity, it's somewhat effective, but it's not nearly as effective as ours. The bad news is, they have come an incredibly long way in the last 20 years, and they're going to catch up. They're going to catch up because, number one, they're devoting unlimited resources to their military, and number two, they are stealing everything they can from us. So they, you know, the Chinese state internet hackers are methodically going through every single one of our defense companies, probing their defenses and trying to get into the network and exfiltrate as much data as they can. And then they sift through it and they say two things. One, can I use this data to improve my Chinese systems? Which obviously, if they can get even unclassified information about our systems, that can be a big advantage for them. And then number two, is there something in here that can help me defeat the US should we end up in a conflict? So that's incredibly concerning. So right now, we have an unquestioned advantage, but don't sleep on China. Don't sleep on China. Okay, any other questions? So I don't want to leave this on a down note. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I said I turned over my job last Friday. It was a great ceremony. It was a change of command and also a retirement ceremony. And then, so that was Friday, and then we took 200 people to the baseball game Friday night, and then we had a party at our house Saturday, and because life wasn't confusing and difficult enough, Saturday at noon we went and adopted a puppy. So that was our retirement gift to my wife, Nicole, who is deserving of so much more. But at the party at our house Sunday night, we have a wall that's painted with chalkboard paint, and so we constructed a poll on what to name the new puppy. And through a completely unbiased, non-Russian hacked voting system, the winner was Louisville Slugger. So she calls him Louie, I call him Slugger. The dog is confused. It's great, though. Thank you very much.
Admiral, in 1957, my family and I was a little younger at the time.
Me too.
We sailed into Boston Harbor, and my first sight of the U.S. was USS Constitution with icicles hanging from the rigging. So thank you for bringing that back today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Craig's going to be back there at the What is Rotary table, and we are adjourned.